Today, we will reflect on the youth of Lyndon Johnson and his rise to power as described in Doris Kearns' award-winning biography. We ponder what events in his student years and his early years in Congress suggest that he would quickly rise through the leadership ranks. How did his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, and her family fund his early campaigns? How did her family help them purchase the radio station that she managed that made them millionaires? During the Great Depression, how was LBJ able to attract the attention of both Eleanor Roosevelt and FDR? And how did this help in his rise to leadership? Please, we welcome interest and questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources used for this video. Please feel free to follow along in the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare, which includes illustrations, and our sister blog includes footnotes, and both include our Amazon book links. When his biographer Doris Kearns was bouncing up and down in his pickup truck as Lyndon managed his Texas ranch in his retirement, he told her many recollections of his past, his rise to power, his years in Texas, and his childhood years on his ranch. Lyndon remembered, "I still believe my mother was the most beautiful, sexy, intelligent woman I had ever met. And I was determined to recapture her wonderful love, but not at the price of my daddy's respect. I was going to reach beyond my father. I would finish college. I would build great power and gain high office. Mother would like that. I would succeed where her own father had failed. I would go to the Capitol and talk about great ideas. She would never be disappointed in me again." Now, his mother Rebecca was ambitious herself, but his father was nothing more than a small-time farmer and trader dabbling in local politics, winning a seat in the Texas legislature. When she saw her son's promise, she channeled her unrealized ambition into her talented son. When he flagged, when he disappointed her, he would sometimes withhold her affection, giving him the silent treatment, behavior that he himself would later exhibit in his rise to power. Though he was closer to his mother, as most children are, Lyndon also admired his father. He had principles. He stood up for unpopular positions. He fought the influence of the Ku Klux Klan, and he fought to improve the lives of the common folk as best he could. Rebecca realized early in her marriage that Lyndon's father was not open to intellectual discussions. She compensated for this by showering attention on Lyndon, who learned the alphabet before he was 2, learned to read and spell before he was 4, and at 3 could recite long passages of poetry from Longfellow and Tennyson. Lyndon remembered, "I'll never forget how much my mother loved me when I recited these poems. The minute I finished, she would take me in her arms and hug me so hard that I sometimes thought I would be strangled to death." But later, Lyndon was never comfortable around intellectuals, seeing school as a necessary stepping stone to a successful career. His mother tried to interest him in the debate club in high school, but he wasn't interested. He was always better at persuading people 1 or 2 at a time, after learning their personal perspectives and interests. Lyndon never liked reading for its own sake. He preferred reading histories and biographies. As he grew older, Lyndon drew closer to his father, enjoying his company as he campaigned among his rural neighbors, often coming home with freshly baked bread and other home-cooked dishes. William Jennings Bryan's populist movement had been popular among the farmers, and his father admired the Bull Moose progressives led by Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson's New Freedom. The Civil War was in living memory. There were elderly veterans from that war, and more attention was paid in school to the great orators Daniel Webster and Henry Clay, who preached their devotion to the Union. There was also pride in the history of how Sam Houston led the short-lived Republic of Texas, first to gain independence after the famed Battle of the Alamo, and then to join the Union before the Civil War. Although Texas was one of the southern states that later seceded to join the ill-fated Confederacy. LBJ later told Doris Kearns, "I had never had any bigotry in me. My daddy wouldn't let me. He was a strong anti-Klansman. The Klan controlled the state when I was a boy. They threatened to kill my dad several times." Now, Doris Kearns tells us the entertaining story of how, in college, he became the assistant to Cecil Evans, the college president, and eventually shifted the control of the student government from the jocks to the intellectuals through tireless campaigning, door-knocking, and listening to his fellow students' aspirations, which foreshadowed his rise in the Senate many years later. Lyndon wrote in the school paper, "What you accomplish in life depends almost completely upon what you make yourself do. Perfect concentration and a great desire will bring a person success in any field of work he chooses. The very first thing one should do is to train the mind to concentrate upon the essentials and discard the frivolous and unimportant. Lyndon wrote in a school paper editorial, "The world today is looking for men who are not for sale, men who are masters of themselves and their tempers, men who place principle above all else, men who are honest and true, men who love work and the contentment it brings, men who are willing to lose sight of self, ease, and pleasure in the effort to serve others." LBJ continues, "Duty drives devotees with a relentless hand through trials that seem intolerable. No labor is too arduous for duty to exact, no sacrifice too great for her to demand, no service beyond her command." Kearns writes, his mother Rebecca insisted that in politics, the true gentleman always proceeded with the most splendid of motives in pursuit of the highest ideals. Every action should be for the common good and public benevolence, demonstrating a Christian spirit. Now, on the recommendation of Cecil Evans, the college president, Lyndon spent 9 months as the school principal of an elementary school in Cotulla, Texas. 3/4 of the residents were Mexican, few spoke English, and all struggled to survive in a dry and treeless land. Johnson said he was determined to improve the lives of those poor little kids. "I saw hunger in their eyes and pain in their bodies. Those little brown bodies had so little and needed so much. I was determined to spark something inside them, to fill their souls with ambition and interest and belief in the future." He spent half of his first month's salary on softball bats and gloves, basketballs and volleyballs. He helped coach their teams and their debating clubs. But these activities ceased soon after he left to teach high school for the next year. After a local politician asked him to successfully manage his campaign for the Texas legislature, he recommended Johnson for a staff position for Richard Kleberg, an incoming congressman. He would spend nearly 2 decades in Washington, moving up to the pinnacle of the ladder. When he arrived in Washington, he rented a room in the Dodge Hotel, as did many other congressional assistants. In the first few weeks, he took multiple showers and brushed his teeth multiple times to meet as many of his neighbors as possible, so he could pick the shrewdest and most informed to be his teachers. Richard Kleberg was more interested in the Washington social scene than his official functions. This gave Lyndon great latitude in running the office, addressing concerns of his constituents, resolving whatever difficulties they faced in their dealings with the various federal bureaucracies, often working weekends and 18-hour days. Kleberg's office gained a reputation for zealously lobbying the federal bureaucracy to protect the interests of his constituents, solving their problems. Lyndon had a knack for transforming menial posts into politically influential positions. He volunteered to be a Democratic doorkeeper, which was previously filled by teenage relatives of congressmen. The doorkeepers would bring cards from visitors to congressmen on the House floor. He used this post to observe the give and take of congressional actions, to learn the practical aspects of the House rules, and to converse and build relationships with other congressmen. The legislative secretaries, or aides of the congressman, belonged to a discussion group called the Little Congress. He intensely lobbied the other aides to become the youngest speaker of this discussion group, proposing that they invite more interesting speakers to their meetings and enhancing the group's influence on the Hill. On a short trip to Austin, Texas, LBJ met Claudia Taylor, who had graduated from the top of her class, earning a degree in journalism. She was sharp, she was shy, she was sensitive, and best of all, absolutely dependable. He suggested that they have breakfast the next morning, followed by a drive in the country. He was very open about his teaching, his salary as a congressional secretary, his ambitions, and about his family, especially his mother, whom he opined would love to meet her. Now, Claudia agreed, so he immediately changed course to drive her to the ranch. And his mother, Rebecca, adored Claudia. A week later, she introduced Lyndon to her father and family. Her father had risen from humble circumstances to become a successful businessman. Her father took her aside to tell her, "Daughter, you have been bringing home a lot of boys, but this time you've brought home a man." And they were married within the month, and she is better known by her nickname, Lady Bird Johnson. Like Rebecca, Lady Bird was a strong woman. Soon after World War II ended, Lyndon heard that a small local bankrupt radio station was up for sale. Lady Bird's father lent them the money to buy the station, which Lady Bird ran in a day when it was unusual for women to run businesses. She ran the station prudently, and the radio station eventually made them millionaires. No doubt Lyndon's political influence smoothed the way over regulatory hurdles, but Kearns reports that there is no indication that he actively intervened in the government's oversight of her business. Lyndon ensured his quick rise to power by quickly reacting to opportunities. Kearns tells us that in June 1935, President Roosevelt created by executive order the National Youth Organization to provide jobs for hundreds of thousands of young people forced out of work or school during the Great Depression. The afternoon after the order was signed, Lyndon phoned Sam Rayburn and other contacts in the House to have him appointed director of the Texas NYO. Lyndon saw this as an opportunity to build a constituency for a future congressional campaign. With his characteristic energy, he crisscrossed the state of Texas, speaking to hundreds of government and business officials to collaborate on jobs for young people, providing materials, housing, and supervision for the government-funded jobs. Within 6 months, 18,000 Texas youths were put to work in a variety of jobs. When Eleanor Roosevelt visited Texas, she wanted to meet this brilliant young man she had heard so much about. Now, Lyndon didn't have long to wait. One afternoon, he saw the headlines announcing that his Congressman Buchanan had died. Immediately, he discussed this with Lady Bird, and her father agreed to donate $10,000 to his campaign, which was a handy sum during the Depression. Several days after his funeral, Lyndon announced his candidacy to the residents of Johnson City. Lyndon campaigned feverishly in the 42-day campaign, visiting every village in the district, shaking hands with everyone he met, even farmers plowing their fields, speaking wherever he could. But in the last week of the campaign, he developed severe stomach pains. He had appendicitis, and he learned of his landslide victory in his hospital bed. Shortly after his election, LBJ was invited to meet President Roosevelt, who was on a cruise in the Gulf of Mexico. LBJ talked to FDR like they were old friends, talking about naval matters, since LBJ knew the president had formerly been the Assistant Secretary to the Navy. FDR told him to call Tom Corcoran, his aide, who paved the way for his assignment on the coveted House Committee on Naval Affairs. LBJ used his easy access to the White House to lobby for several WPA projects and to bring electrical power to rural areas of Texas. Then the senator from Texas passed away, and once again LBJ vigorously campaigned for the vacant Senate seat. But this time he faced stiffer opposition. He lost narrowly by only 1,300 votes, which was an impressive showing for a new congressman. 5 months later, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, drawing the United States into World War II. The next day, LBJ enlisted in the Navy. He earned the Silver Star, but a year later, FDR ordered that all senators and congressmen in the service return to Capitol Hill. LBJ later exclaimed, "From my experience in World War II, I learned that war is caused by a lust for power by a few evil leaders, and by a weakness on the part of the people, whose love for peace too often displays a lack of courage that serves as an open invitation to all the aggressors of the world." When reflecting on LBJ's political career, it is helpful to know when the Democrats and Republicans were in control of the presidency in both houses of Congress. For most of the years LBJ served in public office, the Democratic Party controlled Congress and the presidency. However, the Democrats temporarily lost control of the House and the Senate in the midterm elections after Truman became president when FDR died. But they regained control of both houses when Truman unexpectedly beat Dewey in the 1948 elections, even with Southern Democrats running a third-party Dixiecrat candidate opposing civil rights. The Republicans regained control of both the House and the Senate when Eisenhower was elected president in 1952, but Democrats regained control of both houses of Congress during Eisenhower's midterm elections in 1954, and the Democrats retained control of Congress for many years afterwards, including during the Nixon presidency. Now, in 1948, the other Texas senator resigned. LBJ campaigned with his usual manic vigor, and in the final week of the campaign, he was hospitalized for kidney stones. With the help of his campaign manager, John Connolly, he won the seat by only 87 out of 900,000 votes, earning him the nickname Landslide Lyndon. And the freshman Senate class of 1948 was exceptional. It included Hubert Humphrey, Estes Kefauver, and Russell Long of Louisiana, son of the popular populist kingfish, Huey Long. Kearns writes, "Power in the Senate had been exercised since 1937 by an informal coalition of conservative Republicans and Southern Democrats. in which, during the Truman years, the conservative Republicans agreed to vote with the South against civil rights legislation if the Southern Democrats voted against Truman's social and economic legislation. Since his constituency was conservative, LBJ felt compelled to vote with this informal coalition most of the time. Since he did support some civil rights endeavors, he declined to join the Southern caucus of 22 Southern senators, unwilling to be branded as a conservative. He showed deference to the Senate leaders, rarely speaking out against the majority positions. Although he began as one of the least well-known senators, within 3 years LBJ was elected party whip, part of the leadership of the Senate. After he was elected to be Senate Minority Leader, Johnson was in his element. He excelled in bargaining with individual senators, and he was able to build a profile on each one, learning who their constituencies were, their political positions and aspirations, and what was their deeply held beliefs and convictions. He was one of the most effective Senate leaders in history. Although Eisenhower was easily re-elected in 1956, the Democrats won back control of both the House and the Senate during the 1954 midterm elections, making LBJ the Senate Majority Leader. LBJ could be quite convincing. 2 journalists described how intensive he could be. The treatment could last 10 minutes or 4 hours. It came enveloping its target at the Johnson Ranch swimming pool, in one of Johnson's offices, in the Senate cloakroom on the floor of the Senate itself, wherever Johnson might find a fellow senator within his reach. Its tone could be supplication, accusation, cajolery, exuberance, scorn, tears, complaint, and the hint of threat. It was all of these together. The treatment ran the gamut of human emotions. Its velocity was breathtaking, and it was all in one direction. Interjections from the target were rare. Johnson anticipated them before they could be spoken. He moved in close, his face a scant millimeter from his target, his eyes widening and narrowing, his eyebrows rising and falling. From his pockets poured clippings, memos, statistics. Mimicry, humor, and the genius of analogy made the treatment an almost hypnotic experience and rendered the target stunned and helpless. Like any good congressional leader, LBJ would not permit a bill to hit the floor of the Senate, let alone debate the issue, before he knew how the senators would vote, which led many in the press to accuse him of manipulation and corruption because the process seemed opaque. This consultative style also helped him negotiate with a popular Republican president. Previously, FDR had governed during the war as a bipartisan president, even appointing a Republican to his cabinet, and this bipartisan spirit persisted under the Eisenhower administration. Johnson complained to Kearns that all his fuss about democracy and procedure had nothing to do with my leadership and everything to do about liberals' need to criticize. First, they tell me they want a strong leader in the Senate so they can get results. So I give them leaderships and I get results. Then they change their tune and say what they really want is democracy and participation and decentralized leadership. Kearns notes that to Johnson, debate could involve issues of principle, such as to assist the blacks or restrain the unions, but it was not the method to achieve results. A year after LBJ was selected to be the Senate Minority Leader, the Supreme Court in 1954 handed down its landmark decision, Brown v. Board of Education, which mandated that public schools be desegregated with all deliberate speed. This oxymoronic phrase was used since the court knew that many in the South would resist desegregating their schools. The Republican President Eisenhower reluctantly supported various civil rights issues. He dispatched federal troops to enforce the desegregation of the schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. When Governor Orville Faubus opposed the enforcement of the Supreme Court Brown decision, the general in Eisenhower could not tolerate this insubordination. The defiant and often violent reaction of Southerners was one reason the Democrats increased their control of the House and Senate in the 1956 elections. After Governor Faubus attempted to use the Arkansas National Guard to block black students from attending Little Rock Central High School in 1957, Eisenhower then federalized the state's National Guard, and instead used them to protect the black students chosen by the NAACP to attend the high school. LBJ believed that normally the president should take the lead in proposing major legislation, and Eisenhower's Attorney General convinced him to submit the Civil Rights Act of 1957 to Congress. Kearns tells us that the bill had 3 provisions: the creation of a Civil Rights Division within the Justice Department, and it gave the Justice Department authority to intervene on behalf of individuals whose civil rights were being violated in housing, education, voting, or law enforcement. And it appointed a Civil Rights Commission to recommend further legislation. Now, previous civil rights bills over the past 2 decades were strangled in Congress by the Southern senators and congressmen who controlled the major committees through their tenure, and this civil rights bill was initially delayed. However, political pressure during and after the 1956 elections, coupled with the persistent lobbying by Lyndon Johnson, finally saw the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Many in the press gave Lyndon Johnson credit for the passage of the bill. Although this was not a comprehensive civil rights bill, it was an excellent beginning. Next, we will reflect on how LBJ was chosen to be John F. Kennedy's vice president, ascending to the presidency a few years later after the assassination of JFK. And we will reflect on how he shepherded the civil rights and Great Society legislation through Congress, and how the Vietnam War damaged his legacy. And now we'll discuss the sources we used for this video. Doris Kearns' biography, Lyndon Johnson, An American Dream, was part autobiography, because one of her main sources were her notes of the hundreds of hours she interviewed him after his retirement, when she lived at his ranch during her school breaks and summers, both soon after he woke up early in the morning, and then afterwards bouncing in his pickup truck as he looked after his sprawling ranch. Now, Freud was more in vogue in the 70s, and she was part amateur psychoanalyst, although she suspected he may have manufactured some of the dreams he claimed to experience that she recounts in the book. His mother truly played an outsized role in his life, and her speculations are backed up by perhaps the largest number of personal interviews any biographer has heard. And Doris Kearns later married. She is now Doris Kearns Goodwin. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends, and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons, and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.